The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. The stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Av8r Tony, his co-hosts, and his guests. Together, we will explore the many pathways to an aviation profession, the realities of what a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Av8r Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 69 of the Squawk Ident podcast, recorded on the 29th of January, 2021, from the Av8r Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On this episode of Squawk Ident, Av8r Tony and Captain Roger discuss PSA's decision to ground most of their fleet and the effects it has had on the mainline partner. We follow up with JetPack Man, ATP Flight School agreements with Frontier Airlines. We will discuss rusty pilots back on the flight line and much more. Now that our pre-flight is complete, let's get ready to push off the gate, start up our virtual podcast engines, and get ready for takeoff. Squawk Ident episode 69 is officially underway. To help me get flight 69 off the ground and on our way of the Squawk Ident podcast is an exceptional aviator and co-host. He is an award-winning trophy-hoisting tennis champion, a professional CFI, II, MEI flight instructor, a former freight dog, former airline pilot, a current King Air flight instructor, a Falcon 2000 commander, a captain, and a corporate operator as well. After a long day of short flights from somewhere in San Diego, California, where he sits in his freshly painted oasis of chaos, please help me in welcoming back to the show, Captain Roger. Roger? How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Tony. How are you? It's good to be back. It's been a little while for me.
Yeah, it has. But that's good. You've been busy. You've been flying.
I have been busy. I was busy flying the last episode that you did this past week. Hopefully most people can't see me right now, but I've got the 5-day non-flying scruffy beard going on, which will be taken care of within the ensuing hours because I go back to work tomorrow. But yeah, definitely been busy. It's been good, keeping me out of most trouble.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling. Actually, right before this recording, I was shaving about 2.5 weeks worth of stubble off.
That's right.
I was going to record with it, and then I looked at myself and I kind of scared myself. And I thought, oh God, I've been going around the house with this for the past few weeks. Yep. And I'm proud of it. That's what us pilots do, right? When we're not flying and we don't have to shave, I really don't know any pilot that's out there.
Why do something that you don't need to do? That's what I always say, Why do anything extra?
Yeah. Well, my daughter, I love it when she's like, Dad, don't hug me. Your beard is scratchy. Like, oh, really? Come here.
I got my daughter, it was a couple nights ago, and I turned it into a punishment for her. Like, I don't remember what she's supposed to do. I think she was supposed to do something kind of school related, and I just started whiskering. I think he referred to as whiskering her face. I think I might have actually maybe burned her a little bit.
Oh, that's
please nobody report me out there. Please, yes. She's fine now, I promise. Not permanently scarred.
Little exfoliation there going on, huh?
Yeah.
Why not? So no, I'm glad to see that you've had a little bit of time and to get some stuff done around the house. And I've been doing pretty much the same thing. I was very fortunate to not have much flying this month. I absolutely took advantage of that, and I came down there a couple weeks ago. We were working together on the property there, and kind of mentioned that on the last intro on the previous podcast that we were down there swinging hammers together, and it was kind of cool to hang out.
We were,
doing stuff other than podcasting together. But it was cool. I really appreciated the working with you and coming down and getting to hang out. So
please, thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. Then I got so inspired by all the work we've been doing in the past few months that I started to pick up all the work around here at the house that I've been kind of putting off because I've been using the pandemic as an excuse. It's like, oh, well, we really shouldn't spend any money or invest any time right now. We should wait. And so, yeah, in this past few weeks, I've pretty much got everything ready to go to remodel a bathroom myself, and sprinkler systems and a whole new landscaped yard, and landscape fabric is down, and now I have to go and have some rock delivered and going to spread that out. And home ownership, it's something that I think is disappearing slowly because the newer generation, I hear it all the time, and even from my very own daughter, said, I'm never going to own a house. I'll have an apartment or I don't have to deal with a yard and cutting.
Well, I think there's a couple different issues at play there, but the work being only one of them.
Yeah. It's definitely something I enjoy. I enjoy sitting out in the backyard and watching the aircraft fly very close patterns to Ontario over my house. I watch Amazon Prime basically once an hour. Come in on a short final in Ontario. And speaking of, we had quite exciting weather phenomena here in Southern California the other day. Here I was at Home Depot with a flatbed full of building material, and I'm sitting there in line waiting to pay, and I look out at these giant doors that are in front of me, and it was dumping snow like for 4 minutes. It was like we were in Chicago in the middle of the winter. It was dumping snow in Southern California. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't seen that happening here probably in at least a decade or two.
Yeah, we had severe Southern California weather for, what is it, just that one day? And you had texted me it's snowing at my house, and I actually didn't really believe you.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't believe you at all.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because here I am, and it only lasted like 4 minutes. By the time I paid, I was going to run outside and do a little live video and post it and send it to you. And it was done by the time I paid. It was finished. And so here I am pushing the cart, everything's wet. I load the car, and as soon as I jump in, I look at my windshield and it's covered in snow. So I had to turn the wipers on, and it's gone instantly because it was above freezing. It was just one cloud that just decided, yeah, I'm done. It just started to dump. I tried to see if they were reporting it at Ontario on their METAR, and nope, they did not report snow. I guess it happened so quickly it was a non-event, but it was exciting. It was very exciting. So for those of you that are in the Midwest or around the world in places where you actually get 4 seasons, and
forgive us.
Yeah, sorry. We're from California. So 62 degrees, and my family's all wearing hoodies and beanies. And
last week was, I was flying last week, and I actually kind of got bit by the weather, but it was really odd. Like, because we had the Santa Anas, and it was kind of warm, but then it was Santa Ana winds because we had all those winds, but then the temperature dropped. And then I actually, on one of my flights, unforecasted, I actually ended up diverting because even though we had Santa Anas, literally in between flying between LA and San Diego, we got fog that rolled in and had to go mist and actually divert.
Wow.
The whole thing was just last week. It was odd weather for down here in Southern California on a couple fronts, snow being only one of those.
Yeah. We're used to the events like the June gloom and all these events where the low-lying fog comes in from cooler air coming in over the ocean and
over the land.
And then it hits the land. Yeah. So
there's a known commodity for us here.
Yeah. But to have it here in January, that's kind of unheard of. I mean, we get 1 or 2 days of actual rain where you need an umbrella, because here in Southern California, you rarely need an umbrella ever, because it's just sprinkling, it's not a big deal. But to have it rain like yesterday here, it rained all day and today, and it was great. But it's cold, it's in the 40s. We're like, what the heck? It's a freezing snap.
Again, for all of you people in the rest of the world, we apologize.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just not used to it. And so it's exciting for us. There are some many humorous YouTube videos out there of Southern Californians experiencing rain drizzle and like stopping work to go outside to see it rain. It happens. But no, it's good. It's great to experience that. And I'm glad we've been getting a lot done. But let's talk about aviation. We've been not flying very much. Or at least I haven't. You've been doing a lot of short flights, and you've been telling me not many layovers, which is great. You get to be home in the evening with your family. How's your schedule been in the past couple weeks?
It's kind of been feast or famine, I guess is the best way to describe it. There was a stretch of where I wasn't doing very much. That was a couple weeks ago when you had come down and we were doing stuff around the house. And then I went on a really busy stretch, and there were several day trips in there. And I think there was only one that was an overnight, but it was like a day trip. And then I finished up on Sunday, and then I've been off this week, and then I go back starting tomorrow for another 4 days, and then I'm off for a few days, and then things get a little bit wonky after that. But it's kind of been stretches actually.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I think with the flying picking up again in the industry, the numbers have been a little bit more consistent now. And I just got an email from my chief pilot here was ringing as we started this podcast, indicating that he felt like things were getting back to normal. He could see more passengers in the terminal and flights going out more full more often, and this is great. This is great news. And I think this rollout of the vaccine that we've seen, even though we're talking about shortages and not enough to go around because everybody wants it now. I want it now. And so, but give it another 60, 90 days. I think more options are going to be available, and we'll start to see a lot of returning to the flying, as we've mentioned, basically for the last year that we've been talking about this corona virus and pandemic, is that we're going to see this rubber band effect. It might not be snapping back to normal as quickly as we originally hoped, but definitely all these upward trends are much better. I know the quarterly numbers came out for many airlines, and it looks like their fourth quarter, they didn't lose as much as they thought. I know Southwest and American both had posted information about that recently. But PSA did something just yesterday that caught my eye. And the way I discovered it is I received a notification on my company email indicating if you're a commuter, be very cognizant of who you're flying on, because there's an airline out there, PSA, that has grounded almost the entirety of their fleet. I mean, what the heck? How did this happen? And is this a severe thing or not? And so I did a little research, and I found an article. Breaking news: PSA Airlines grounds a fleet, impacting American Airlines' connectivity. This from Simply Flying magazine in an article published just yesterday, January 28th, from Daniel Martinez Garbuno. And this was entitled Breaking: PSA Airlines grounds fleet, impacting American Airlines' connectivity. The article states that the regional carrier PSA Airlines has temporarily removed most of its aircraft from service to complete a standard inspection. Suspect. This measure is impacting American Airlines' connectivity because PSA has a fleet of about 130 Bombardier aircraft, many of which operate its regional routes. So what's going on? Earlier today, which was yesterday, on Thursday, PSA Airlines advised that most of its fleet is grounded. It added that it is working to resolve the issue and sincerely apologizes to their customers for the inconvenience. PSA Airlines is an American regional airline flying under the American Eagle brand for American Airlines. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of the American Airlines Group, or AAG. In a tweet, American said, "We're working to accommodate our mutual PSA airline customers as quickly as possible." The airline added that passengers can check their flight status on its website. But have you ever heard of this, Roger? 130 airplanes, almost the entirety of their fleet, gets grounded overnight for a, what did they call it? Standard inspection?
I can't really say that I've heard of an airline's entire fleet getting grounded. From time to time we do hear things like this for various reasons that a subset of airplanes will get grounded for some kind of maintenance. I I hate to try and speculate exactly what was going on. And as a side note, these planes are all back flying again. They have
Yes.
cleared the issue, and so just to get that out there, it's not an issue already. It was a little bit. I'm surprised for American. It was probably a little surprising to all of a sudden have that amount of feed, primarily from the East Coast, where PSA operates, to have that amount of flight cancellations and a bunch of airplanes pulled out of service. Um,
Yeah. Well,
you
according
know, from the little bit that I saw, from an overall safety standpoint, thankfully, I don't think it was going to be that big of a deal, but it definitely was an odd event.
Yeah, we were talking about all they had to do is tighten 3 bolts and the aircraft were returned back to service. Again, from this article, they say, according to planespotters.net, PSA Airlines had 130 airplanes, 61 Bombardier CRJ-700s, and 69 Bombardier CRJ-900s. And according to airlinegeeks.com, up to 122 flights operated by PSA Airlines were canceled. So why? American said out of an abundance of caution. Well, a few days ago, the FAA published an airworthiness directive for the Bombardier BD-100 airplanes that has been in effect since January 27th of 2021. According to the FAA, the AD was prompted by a report that corrosion was found on the shock strut cylinders during unscheduled maintenance of the nose landing gear. Now, we've kind of read through this article and talked about how it doesn't seem like the two are related. And I can see how a major airline like American could decide, hey, well, even though that's not our particular, it's the same manufacturer, let's take a look. They didn't really tell us that was the case. As a matter of fact, in a statement sent to Simply Flying or Simple Flying, is an American Airlines spokesperson told them that out of an abundance of caution, PSA Airlines has temporarily removed most of its aircraft from service in order to complete necessary standard inspection of the nose gear door, not the strut, which we are working with PSA and the FAA to immediately address the issue. We're working with our customers to rearrange their accommodations on other flights, and we're working to return the impacted aircraft to service. And as you mentioned, they were out overnight, and every single one of them is now back on the line from what we heard.
390 nuts and bolts.
That's it. So something to do with the landing gear door, the nose landing gear door. Now, we were kind of discussing this. There are a lot of CRJ aircraft out there.
In operation for American and the other
all of them.
Carriers.
United, Delta, even Legacy has a few of those, I heard. So
everybody's flying those.
Yeah. So why was PSA the only airline to effectively do this emergency grounding of every aircraft, but it's a standard inspection that couldn't have been done at the next phase check? So something is going on, whether it's an internal audit that discovered something that they were doing incorrectly. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's always a possibility. I mean, Bombardier makes several different variations of airplanes, kind of going along with what you're talking about. I believe one of those unscheduled maintenance inspections was on a Challenger aircraft, which is a business jet variant of a Bombardier product. Maybe there was some misinterpretation on what exactly was applicable to which airplanes, and PSA missed it. And, during their internal audits, they said, oh, hey, you know what? We really got to get this done. Tighten it up.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and the good thing I think is that the system worked the way that we would want it to. As I understand it, this was an internally discovered thing that they then self-reported to the FAA. Hey, we've got this issue. They were upfront about it.
Yeah.
They took the necessary precautions, did the necessary work, and 24 hours later, we're back up to what it sounds like is normal operations.
Yeah. And in the article, it also, as you mentioned, it does mention that the corrosion that was found on the Bombardier BD-100s and the 300 Challenger, that was separate from what had been reported from the American Airlines grounded PSA fleet due to an issue despite being related to CRJ family. Nevertheless, American Airlines has told Simply Flying that this is not the case. It is not related from one to the other. So this is definitely something that was happening internally with 3 bolts in the landing gear doors that had to be inspected. And
for whatever reason, they weren't.
They self-disclosed to the FAA that they had an issue. They were going to ground it. And, coming from a perspective of, like a regulatory and liability perspective, they did the right thing. At least in my thoughts, that they absolutely did the right thing. Yeah, it's kind of an inconvenience to people, even pilots that are trying to commute, because PSA is a Charlotte-based company, a regional carrier, and it takes care of a lot of traffic for the smaller communities in that area, and a lot of pilots rely on that to commute to work. Well, we last couple of shows, we've been really having a good time with JetPack Man. You've heard about this guy.
JetPack Man.
JetPack Man.
Here we go again.
It brings a smile to Roger's face every time I even utter those words. It is awesome. Well, a couple days ago, I got an article sent to me from our very own Captain Roger saying, "Hey, I think we've cracked it. I think we've cracked it." And very interesting. And we kind of talked about this being a possibility, but very interesting. In a follow-up from an article written by Jeremy Krozenowski, I hope I'm not butchering that too bad, from autoblog.com. He writes in a follow-up article from January 21st, entitled "LA's Mysterious Jetpack Guy Could Actually Be a Human-Shaped Drone."
What?
And this is something we were talking about it possibly being. I'll have a link in the show notes, but in this article entitled "LA's Mysterious Jetpack Guy Could Actually Be a Human-Shaped Drone," it says, "Is the flying mannequin in a camouflage jumpsuit any less weird than a real-life Iron Man?" It turns out that the mysterious case of Jetpack Guy casually flying around at a few thousand feet above the ground in California could actually be something completely different, albeit just as dangerous. According to documents collected by the Black Vault via The Drive, I don't know, don't ask me, through the Freedom of Information Act and American Airlines pilot who made the jetpack sighting reported to the FBI, what he saw was actually like the drone in the YouTube video that they mentioned in the article. Now, for those of you listening on the podcast, you're not going to be able to see what's going on here, but I do have something that I'd like to share video, and we'll go on from there. In the title, it says, a mannequin RC flying man scale 1-1 flight demonstration. It looks like even from close up, it looks like a person in there.
Absolutely.
All right, so in this video, we see what seems to be a life-size mannequin drone, and it's the guy's controlling it from the ground. And looking at it, it looks just like a person in there. They got the camo outfit and oh my God, it's spectacular. But I could see how. Can you imagine hitting that while flying around?
The safety aspects of it remain very real. I had a good time with this for 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks ago, I remember. I'm not one of those guys that subscribes to a lot of conspiracy theories. I'm sure that they do exist. However, I'm not big into them. I feel much better about this because I thought the whole thing was pretty ridiculous, that there was some Jetpack Man stupid enough to go flying around at 3,000 feet around the Southern California, greater Los Angeles airspace. This is much more plausible to me. Not to say that the safety issues are not still very real, because they are. Don't get me wrong about that. But can you imagine the guy, whoever's on the ground controlling this drone, just must be having a field day with it?
Oh my God, they're probably cracking up. I was surprised that they haven't posted anything on social media or YouTube or something of a video of it. To check it out, because I'm sure now that the FBI is involved, that's ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
But from the video, for those that aren't able to see it, as you can see, the video depicts a radio-controlled drone with 2 propellers attached to a backpack that's fitted to a mannequin. The dummy seen here is in full camouflage jumpsuit and boots, and it isn't necessarily the same one that may be buzzing the commercial flights in Los Angeles, but it does prove that such a human-sized drone is possible.
Very possible.
And yeah, it's still not official. The mystery has not been solved yet, and the appropriate authorities are still investigating the situation. But hey, as soon as we get more definitive explanation.
When we have confirmation of an actual drone, we'll let you know.
Oh my God. It's ridiculous. This is what we're talking about. Drone JetPack Man.
I couldn't help. I saw that article before I sent it to you. I couldn't help, but it did put a smile on my face. I started laughing and I said, I need to let Av8rTony know about JetPack Guy.
The drone.
Yeah,
we thought it might have been a Mylar balloon, like a little astronaut Mylar balloon, but who knows? And at those speeds, when you're on approach to Class Bravo airspace and you see something whiz by, it looks like a person. Yeah, it'll freak you out. Oh man. But hey, we just thought we'd update everyone on that, and some more exciting news. I think now that we've seen these different stages in our careers and our industry as professional pilots, we've seen the cyclical nature, the ups and downs, and what we're seeing now, even that I don't know if we'd say that we're in the middle of the pandemic. I think we're more over the hump in terms of our careers, not in terms of its effect on society, but I can see how there's flying starting to ramp up and airports starting to get busier, and safety precaution protocols have been now in place for a while, and we know that they work. So we're starting to see a demand start to creep up of pilots in the future. And I've seen articles recently from United, from Alaska, from Southwest, and now a new article that indicates ATP Flight Schools will form pilot pathways with Frontier Airlines. This is exciting news for a low-cost carrier to partner up with a flight school to ramp up their availability of potential prospects to become airline pilots. So I got excited when I saw this. Roger, have you seen this?
I did see that there was an agreement with ATP and Frontier Airlines. I didn't look into the specifics of it. I think that it was really good. I think the best part of it was really good to see that even in today's environment, that there still is that light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that was the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway for me. And that being said, those ultra low cost carriers, I think that they are poised to take on a much greater share of especially the domestic flying.
Yeah.
I read something, just a short blurb somewhere about how this, getting hired on with, the Frontier, I think they're expected to double their fleet in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Their projections have been
Southwest in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because I think that especially the pandemic, even without the pandemic, I know that Frontier was looking at doing that with their fleet, but I think that the leisure domestic flyer is probably where the greatest growth in domestic air travel could be. And
yeah,
they're going to need pilots. The pilot shortage is still real, even if just delayed for 5 years or whatever it will be.
Yeah. Well, I think it's less than that. It's only going to be a few years, because
probably
there's an article here from the Associated Press that they published out from newswire.com on January 25th of 2021 from Denver. This article mentions that the Frontier Airlines and ATP Flight Schools have formed a Frontier Direct program, which targets ATP graduates and CFIs for employment as Frontier Airlines first officers. So in the Frontier Direct program, ATP graduates and instructors will progress from ATP straight to the flight deck at Frontier after enhanced ATP CTP training that includes additional Airbus A320 full motion flight simulator experience. The new partnership offers pilots an accelerated path to a rewarding career with Frontier while providing Frontier access to a high-quality pool of qualified pilot applicants, dedicated future employees, and advocates of the Frontier brand. So we kind of looked into this because it kind of sparked my attention that what kind of agreement is this? Is it like almost like a flow through agreement, like some of the partnerships that some of the other carriers have? Or is this more of a preferential hiring? And I think it's the latter. The article goes on to say that after completing the flight training at ATP and you go through their airline career pilot program, graduates gain flight experience with ATP as paid flight instructors. They usually build about 1,500 hours of flight time. And then they'll be recommended for an interview at Frontier Airlines. So it's basically preferential interview treatment. After the candidate is selected and the interview process is complete with Frontier, applicants would receive a conditional offer of employment and continue working towards their 1,500 hours, which is the minimum for an ATP certificate, before you can go on to as a airline transport pilot. And once they complete that, they would transition to Frontier as the pilot demand warrants. So this is pretty cool. You end up with full motion Airbus sim time. I'm sure it's part of the program that you have to pay for. But knowing that as long as you don't bang up an airplane, you've complete your training, that you get preferential hiring at a pretty good size airline. So it's considered a major airline. And it's growing, and they have their Airbus fleet is their projected aircraft purchases are, like you said, they're astronomical. So this is exciting.
I think it's kind of, it's good for everybody involved. It gives ATP the ability to, drum up business for them because they have something to offer. I think for Frontier, they're probably trying to pull some of the guys away from the legacy carriers who will be no doubt hiring in the next 3 to 5 years. So Frontier will try and pull from the legacy carriers and get some people into their program as early as possible. ATP gets some business from that. It's kind of a win-win for everybody. And at the same time, I don't think that, Frontier pilots or aspiring Frontier pilots, they're going to take a whole lot of spots either. Cause I think it's only a few new hires per month that those guys would get anyway.
Right.
So I think it's a win-win-win.
Yeah. 4 ATP graduates have already completed the program in a proof of concept that started in 2020. So just a year ago, they started the program. The 4 pilots have already merged onto the flight line to Frontier. And after successfully completing their new hire training in IOE, they're like, hey, this program works. And, as yourself, a former ATP graduate, you've kind of experienced this. If they had this when you were going through, I mean, would you have jumped on that chance, or do you think it's more?
I mean, without a doubt, yes. I mean, just look at it from an economic standpoint. We'll assume, this is just a basic assumption, but for me, when I went through ATP, I finished my college degree and I went to ATP and I finished up and I got hired at ExpressJet at age 23. Imagine if I'd gone through the ATP program and finished, and instead of being hired at ExpressJet at age 23, I was hired at Frontier Airlines when I was 23 years old. And can you imagine the career path, the career that I would have had?
Well, if you would have stuck with just staying at Frontier, you'd have been just
stay at Frontier for my entire career.
Yeah, you would have been a captain. They have the largest 320 Neo fleet in the U.S.
If you're 23 years old right now and you can go through this program, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have 30 years at a growing carrier with a 401k, exponential salary increase. And quite frankly, Frontier will get a little bit of a bad rap because of their first year pay in comparison to the legacies. But if you're 23, that $55,000 a year or whatever it is when you're 23 is still going to seem like you're a king.
Yeah.
And within 3 years, you'll be a captain. You're going to be a 26-year-old captain of an Airbus 321.
Yeah. A lot of times I think pilots, they see a brand and they think the brand is more important than anything. And I'm not going to dispel that. I think that everybody's decision and path is unique and they have to do what's best for them. And to have an opportunity to go to a flight school and go from flying Pipers and Senecas and Cessnas to the right seat of an Airbus versus the right seat of maybe a Bombardier or an Embraer. Come on, you're getting a type certificate out of that. That is going to be universal, not only in the U.S. but around the world.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a no-brainer.
The whole world is flying those Airbuses. I mean, really, because we still only have 2 aircraft manufacturers out there, and Airbus being one of them.
Yeah. So yeah, this is great news, and coming at a time when I was not expecting this early on. I thought once the demand starts to build, and right now there are plenty of pilots that are qualified that can easily, maybe they've been furloughed or maybe they're on a leave of absence and they think maybe I don't want to deal with this and I'm going to go to a company that's growing rapidly. A low-cost carrier with luxury or vacation flying, that's the future, at least for the time being, as business flying kind of slows down and is going to be a lot slower to come back. That's the vacation destinations are where the money is right now. So this is good news for the low-cost carriers, and it's good news for aspiring pilots that want to get out there and get their foot in the door. If your end game is to be a FedEx driver or a UPS driver or Amazon Prime guy, hey, that's great. But in the meantime, especially if you're young enough you have 20, 30 years ahead of you, get in there and get that experience. It's not about the bigger jet. It's about the opportunity that a type rating is going to be. It's kind of like having a college degree, in something, and then you don't do that. I'm case in point. I have a college degree in film production. The hell am I doing with that? I didn't really pursue that. I pursued other things and avenues, and here I am. I ended up being an airline pilot, and so. But having that certificate is huge because are you a college graduate? Yes, I am. Are you type rated? Yes, I am. Okay. So yeah, go for that. If you have that opportunity, that might be something you might want to look into. And the ATP's new agreement with Frontier Airlines. Well, Roger, as a graduate from ATP, what can you tell me about that program? You've seen a few programs out there. Do you feel like that is one of the better flight school options out there right now?
I think that the answer to that is going to kind of depend on the individual that's on the individual making those decisions. ATP worked really well for me. I had, like I just said, I had just graduated from college. I did my private and my instrument training while I was still in school. And so I went into the program a little bit later than most. And, for those of you who don't know what ATP is basically a program primarily that's going to take you from having a private certificate and then taking you all the way up through your CFIs and your multi-engine and your CFIs. There is a program that will also get you your private, but most people go in with a private and start at the instrument.
Yeah,
I went in with my instrument. It worked really well. Here's the price for it, and go. But part of that is also part of that cost. You're going to get 5 hours in the Seminole. That's what it was when I was there, at least. You're going to get 5 hours in the Seminole to prepare you for your multi-engine check ride. Go. And if you are not ready at 5 hours, that's where some of the issues can arise. If you're ready for that, and if you're ready to do some of your own legwork, if you're going to be a self-starter, then that program will work very well. You get a flat cost, and you're going to go and you're going to get all of your certificates.
Yeah.
If you need a little bit more, if you want to be able to go at more of your own pace, if you're going to want to have the option to do a little bit of extras, extra flying, ATP is probably not going to be the best option for you because now you're outside of the model that they operate at.
Yeah, it is a very, very impacted program. I mean, their homepage at atpflightschools.com, it says there, it's catered for an airline career. So it's an airline career program. It's very fast paced. And they have a 9-month fast track program. So right now they're advertising for $83,995. You can go from 0 time to CFI with airline tuition reimbursement. So if you qualify, you can do this in a very short period of time. Now, $83,000 for an education, that's nothing to scoff at. That's a lot of money to put down. And you're not doing this in a 4-year college environment. You're doing this in 9 months where you, like you said, you eat, breathe, sleep aviation, and with minimal time, you're getting out there. That's why at one point when you were going through, and I remember you and I talked about this decades ago when we were first talking about our experiences when we first met, and going in, at one point they wanted you to have a private or instrument at least, and
right,
before you went in it, because it is such a fast-paced environment that they wanted to make sure that you could at least go through the program and have a higher success rate. And now they're advertising from 0 time all the way up, which it's kind of intimidating.
I think that's partially, probably just the world that we live in now from the pilot shortage. If you can give somebody a product that's going to take them from having nothing, like, hey, you don't need to come in with anything. We're going to do this whole thing for you. And unfortunately, if people are going to wash out during that program, which will be the case, that's just statistics.
Mm-hmm.
They probably weren't going to be ready for the airline training anyway. And that being said, I mean, having heard you just say that, for the young aviators out there trying to make decisions, I would say that in my personal experience, when I learned to fly, almost just the other day, almost 20 years ago, I probably paid close to $80,000 to $85,000 to get my certificates, and that was 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
And so if it's $85,000 to take you all the way up through the CFI, wasn't that what you said? $84,995 or something?
Yeah,
$85,000 to go from 0 to your CFI, when that was what I probably spent 20 years ago. That seems like a fairly phenomenal deal. It is a lot of money. That's what it takes to learn to fly. But just comparing those two things, from 20 years ago, paying the same price 20 years later, I mean, that seems like a really, if you're into being an airline pilot or any kind of commercial professional pilot, that could be a real good way to go. And then maybe you get a job with Frontier at the other end of it.
Yeah, I mean, the program sounds good. I'd like to speak to somebody that has either gone through it or is in it. I went through a program, not an ATP school. I went through a different airline catered program that's actually no longer in existence, but similar options. It was I think $69,000 for me. It was a 10-month program. It didn't have any kind of agreements with a major airline. It had hiring agreements with some of the regional airlines out there, and I ended up applying and getting hired at Sandpiper, as we've mentioned before in the podcast, but I didn't use the agreement. I just got hired from the front door. Because I wasn't in that huge hurry, because I found a pretty good job as a flight instructor, and that's where you and I met. And but the programs that were around then have really been outdated, because now it's all about, we're not just going to train you, we're going to hire you. And I read somewhere in that ATP website that they're talking about a fixed cost program here. So I don't know the details of what's entailed with that, but yeah, because sometimes it starts out at $83,995, and then they go, well, yeah, now you need your multi-rated, because ATP doesn't give you your single, I think, commercial. They just go, what do you need a single commercial for? You're going to an airline. I don't know any airlines.
Your single commercial, because a lot of times where people are going to get their first job is they're going to be a flight instructor. And so in order to be a flight instructor in the single engine, you do a single engine commercial as well.
Aha. So then you got to do the multi commercial, and then start working on your CFI and then double I.
Yeah, except the order the order is a little bit funny. And this actually kind of tying these two things together. I actually interviewed at Frontier Airlines about a year ago, and them going through my logbook very much confused them because of the order of which ATP does their program, because they are very multi-based. So my CFI initial was actually my MEI. So my initial, which I did with the FAA, was in a multi-engine airplane, and then I backtracked to do the single engine commercial and the single engine CFI.
I gotcha.
So it's very much multi-engine centric, but you do get the single engine, but you do all the multi stuff before you do the single.
Yeah. And you would think that would be easier because you've learned the more challenging aircraft first, the more complex aircraft first.
Well, you know, those 8-son pylon things and chandelles. Yeah, I'll take the multi-engine commercial over the single engine commercial any day, to be honest with you.
Yeah, fair point. Very fair point. And then looking at their website, I saw something that caught my eye. They had a tag up at the upper right-hand corner saying the airline pilot.life. What is that? So I clicked on it, and it turns out that it is kind of a blog-centric ATP-sponsored link that you can sign up for. And their slug line is real answers from real pilots. So if you're thinking about flying out there, or you're in the process of getting your ratings, and there's an avenue here sponsored by ATP with frequently asked questions, student experiences, flying the line, day in the life kind of thing. And it's all on this blog sponsored by ATP. So again, there'll be a link in the show notes, but if you're interested, check it out. So as we mentioned earlier, I'm heading out this evening. We had a kind of a late start today because I wanted to make sure I packed after not flying for a few weeks, and I had an ample opportunity to get some rest in the middle of the day, which is crucial when you're flying a red eye. It always kind of makes my hair on the back of my neck stand up when I meet with my pilot captain or whatnot in the cockpit on the very first leg of a red eye, on the very first leg of a trip. And they're like, so, how are you? Did you commute in? Just the typical stuff. Have you had the Rona? All the questions we ask each other now. And then I go, so did you get a good nap in today? And they go, oh, no. I've been up since 6 a.m. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm going to have my eyes really on you because I hope you don't nod off. That's a long time to be awake. The responsible thing to do is always to take a nap in the middle of the day. And I haven't slept so well in a long time. I had a 3.5 hour nap today. I was like, oh my God, this was awesome. I needed to start taking naps more often. But so I'm all rested up, and then we decided to meet up for this quick podcast recording here. And so I'm ready to go. Roger, don't fear not. I'm good to go tonight.
That's what he says, folks. You have no idea how many times we've had to try and record this while he edits out all of the faux pas that he's made.
But that's the beauty of not being live.
Yes, it is. I just keeping it real for all the people out there to let them know that we are not perfect, and take Aviator Tony at his word and for what it's worth.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, dude. Thanks a lot. No, but speaking of rusty pilots, you had sent me a really cool article just a few hours ago about how the airline pilots are now making more in-flight errors, and a lot of the ASAP reports are that they're just rusty because of the pandemic. And in this article that you sent me from Hugo Martin from Yahoo News, dated today, January 29th, indicated that there's some pilots that were having some difficulties. What can you tell me about that?
It was an interesting article, for me to read, and so that's why I forwarded it to you. I didn't know if it was going to make it in today's show, but I think, there's several. I guess there's at least a few things there. The first of which, for whatever reason, when people fill out these ASAP reports at the airlines, this is what pilots at least are claiming as the reasons for the blunders. All of them very minor. Don't get me wrong. There wasn't anything major in there, and which are extremely rare. But when we fill out those ASAP reports, basically to cover ourselves when we do make mistakes in a significant or a sizable number of these, the explanation for why that blunder was made was, I'm not flying as much. Which
it's been a while
okay.
since I flew, and I didn't remember how to time my shoot, But
and it kind of ties into, we talked about this on several episodes ago, maybe even a month or two, about errors that pilots make, and then especially I think in terms of vacation and how you can go 2 or 3 weeks, and even I remember a little bit of that episode. My view of it has kind of changed, because I remember being in the same category. You go on a week and you try and bid your vacation touching back when we had line bidding, and you could go 3 weeks without flying. Getting back on the flight deck was a little bit intimidating. Doing what I do now, I have a very different view of it. I have a couple theories on why that's the case, but it did make me, being a little bit of the Part 91 guy, and I like to just kind of poke fun at the airline guys just because I can right now.
Mm-hmm.
I laughed a little bit. I haven't been flying, guys.
No shame.
And I can't remember what to do.
Well, we mentioned the ASAP program, and anybody that is an aficionado of aviation has probably heard this term before. The ASAP program is a program by the FAA called the Aviation Safety Action Program. The goal of ASAP is to enhance aviation safety through the prevention of accidents and incidents. Its focus is to encourage voluntary reporting of safety issues and events that come to the attention of the employees of certain certificate holders. Notice I said employees, not pilots. Any airline employee can file an ASAP. To encourage an employee to voluntarily report safety issues, even though they may involve an alleged violation of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or 14 CFR, that's the aviation Bible for those that don't know. The enforcement-related incentives have been designed into the program. An ASAP is based on a safety partnership that will include the FAA, the certificate holder, and may include a third party, such as an employer's labor organization or union. So I've filled out ASAPs before. Any pilot that's been on the line for any amount of time, at an airline at least, knows that the ASAP program exists. They tell you about it day one. Now, if you intentionally violate an FAR and you go, well, I'll just ASAP it, that's not how it works. You're going to get the book thrown at you. But if there's a series of events that turn out to generate an error, whether that's yourself as a pilot, air traffic controller, a ground handler, it doesn't matter. If there's a safety-related issue and it comes to your attention, you forget to reset your altimeter, is a prime example. That was a hot button item for the ASAP committee for years. Now, you're going through 18,000 feet, at least here in the U.S., and you forget to reset your altimeters to standard 2992 barometric pressure, and you end up leveling off, say at 21,000 feet, and air traffic control says, Legacy, say altitude. And you're like, what? Oh, crap. We're still at 3001. Stand by, so then I got to say, okay, we're at whatever, 21.5 or 21.3, whatever it is. And, heading back down. Okay. So obviously you've now had a violation. So nothing really too bad unless there was a near miss or something, or you had something bad happen, especially in RBSM, it's a little bit more complicated. But so what do? When you land, the captain fills out an ASAP, the first officer fills out an ASAP, and the air traffic controller may or may not fill out an ASAP because possibly something that they did was erroneous. So by the collection of these reports, now both the FAA and the companies that are involved or certificate holder can then go, okay, how can we make this not happen again? How can we heighten safety? So that's what the program does. It's a great program. Here in the future, I do hope to have someone from Legacy Airlines ASAP committee on the show to give us a little bit more detail about what the program does. I did have the privilege of flying with, very recently, one of our ASAP committee members at Legacy Airlines. And what he told me was something that for years I had not known, which is it's not only about flying, and it's not only about safety of I did something wrong and I want to cover myself, because if you fill out an ASAP and you didn't intentionally do something wrong and there were multiple factors that led up to the situation, they just pretty much say, okay, thank you for the report, slap you on the wrist, you're not going to get violated because, we've agreed that it was an error and you trapped it and you were able to correct it and whatever. But it's not a get out of jail free card. That's number one. Because even if it wasn't intentional, if it created a major problem, someone's going to have to do something, either retraining or whatnot. Worst case scenario, the ASAP will not protect you from a violation if there's intent or, the event happened because of gross negligence. But what was interesting that I didn't know was if you see something out on the ramp and you're like, that's a safety issue, you can ASAP that. It's not always because I did something wrong. It could be, hey, I have an idea to do something better. And that is the ASAP reporting that is often not talked about and not understood. And so we're going to do our best to get more detail about that on a future show. But that's really, we started talking about rusty pilots and we're talking about just ASAP reports when they do something wrong. And this article that you sent me, Roger, was an example of a pilot preparing to pull a passenger jet away from the airport gate, and they forgot to disengage the parking brake, and damage was a part of the experience because the towing vehicle was trying to pull the airplane and they broke the landing gear, basically. So their ASAP was, I'm rusty because of Corona. I haven't flown in a while and I was rusty. So I got to admit, I've seen a very similar, potentially just as disastrous thing happen with me on the flight deck. I was flying with a captain, to be unnamed, about a year ago, and he was a newer captain and kind of new to the base. We discussed that before the flight, and when he got on the headset, the ground personnel said, "All right, Captain, we're all ready for pushback. We see the parker brake is set, gear pins installed, whatever they say." And the captain looked at me, gave me the thumbs up. I called for ramp to get clearance for pushback, which I did. As soon as we got clearance for pushback, I gave him the thumbs up and the instructions. And the captain's response on the intercom to the ground personnel in the tug was, "All right, parker brake release, steering disengage, you're cleared to push," or whatever he said. And I look over and the parking brake was not disengaged. So I immediately put my hands up, got his attention. I was like, no, the park. And so he let go of the parking brake immediately. And the ground personnel responded as soon as that happened, going, "Are you sure the parking brake's disconnected?" Because they have an indicator light on the nose gear that indicates whether or not the parking brake is engaged or disengaged. And their job is to make the appropriate comment on the intercom, get the appropriate response from the captain that the parking brake is indeed disengaged, and then verify, once they're clear to push, that the light is not illuminated. That indicates that the parking brake is on. So they did their job. The safety barriers were in place, even though the captain misspoke and said that without physically releasing the parking brake. And even though that I luckily was paying attention and I saw it and I got his attention, he almost immediately released the brake. That could have resulted in some serious aircraft damage. So this is the Swiss cheese model we've talked about, those barriers. And so now every single time I'm in a cockpit, wherever I'm doing, I stop. And when I hear parking brake released, steering disengaged from my captain, my eyes immediately go to what we call the triple indicator, or the parking brake pressure indicator. And I look to verify that it's indeed disengaged. Not really part of my responsibility. It's not part of my flow. But because we're both liable in the situation in the cockpit or in the flight deck, that I do my best to have that as part of my flow so that I won't be a part of anything like that in the future.
That's part of, learning from your own personal experiences and mistakes that almost happen. We learn a lot that way. Hopefully we're learning from other people's mistakes. It's always better to do that.
Yes.
And kind of going back to the ASAP program, that's what that ASAP program is all about. It is a fantastic program. And really all that it's about is improving airplane and airline safety. Because at its heart, it's okay, where we know that a problem happened, whatever it was. Where is there a track record of those same incidents or those same events happening? And is that something that that the airline or as the airline industry as a whole has to address? Because that's how we can learn. And if we take all of this data, because we have the technology to do it now, we can take all this data across Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines, American, Frontier, Atlas, whatever, whoever those things are, we can take it across an entire industry and say, look, these are where we're having, as a pilot group, these are where we're having some safety issues. These are the safety issues on a ramp. Like you were talking about, hey, I don't think that this ramp procedure is very safe. And we can address that as well. And I think that the interesting thing to me, going back to that article, is, when we write up an ASAP report, what happened? And we give our interpretation of why it happened. And, is because I haven't been flying as much. I think an interesting question would be, has there been more ASAP reports filed? Let's take the reason for their filing out. But since COVID has started, has there been more ASAP reports filed? And would the reason for that maybe be because we're a little bit more rusty? Because to me, if we've got the same amount of ASAP reports filed over the past 12 months as the average over the past 5 years as well, is it really a rusty pilot, or is it really rusty pilots, or is it actually just that happened to be the excuse that they wrote down because it was the easiest thing to blame it on?
Yeah. I think the latter is more of the truth because, I mean, for me personally, and I know you and I have discussed this in the past, if we haven't flown for a while, that first leg back is always a little bit, maybe not intimidating being the right word, but there's always a little bit more precaution taken.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of cool because it's like, oh, wow, I haven't done this in a while, and for me, at least, there's a smile on my face as we rotate, 180,000 pound aircraft off 25 right in Los Angeles, and it's my leg, and like, maybe you want to rotate, like, oh, this is awesome. It doesn't matter. I've been doing it for 20 years. I freaking love that experience. And when you haven't done it in a while, I think you appreciate it more, and you can appreciate the severity of the responsibility of commanding all those people, all that fuel, all that equipment, all those millions of dollars on every leg. And it's a great feeling, but it can be, I guess, intimidating is going to be a good word after all. So yeah, I think that even when you're flying in general aviation, if you haven't flown in a while, that first leg, like you mentioned, you're gonna respect it a little bit more.
Well, I think that that's kind of the interesting thing, comparing general aviation, your weekend warriors, if you will, to the airlines, and maybe why airline pilots have a little bit more of a fear factor or intimidation to that first leg back is because it becomes so rote at the airline level. And I think that that's why airline pilots in general, and this is just a hypothesis, nothing against Earth theory and nothing against airline pilots. I've done it. I've been this person before, but everything is so rote, and it's almost like airlines have tried to take a lot of the flying and decisions away from the pilots in order to try and make it safer. But in the course of trying to make it safer, we've kind of made it so rote that it is easier to overlook things like a parking brake before you're going to get pushed off the gate, or any number of other things. Whereas if you're more like, you don't fly quite as much as the airline guys, or you're more the GA weekend warrior, you have a little bit more respect for it, because you're like, every time you get in the airplane, you're like, okay, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
I got to be ready for it. Whereas, I mean, let's face it, when I was an airline pilot, and you probably would agree to this, is if you've been flying a 4-day and then you had 4 days off and came back for a 4-day, and you've done that for 10 years of your life or 20 years of your life, it's a little different.
Yeah. It's like getting in the car and driving.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm taking off at 200,000 pounds. It's
Yeah.
just not the same. And so it's a lot easier to overlook things. And because of that, I think that sometimes like the COVID and the rusty aspect of it can become a little bit more pronounced at the airline level. Because we try to make it so much safer and we take so much stuff out of the pilot's hands, and all of a sudden it's a little bit new and different, except it's expected to be rote all at the same time.
Yeah. So I think there's a balance between if you're off for a while, to give yourself at least an afternoon or an hour or two on your time off to kind of just go over, the company emails and some things in your head. We've mentioned training many times in the podcast. How do you prepare for recurrent training? How do you prepare for getting a new type rating, a long-term training? And a lot of that has to come with just consistency. If you don't crack a book, but once a year or maybe once every 9 months, when you're in for recurrent, if you've been on that same airplane for 20 years, okay, I get it. But if you haven't, and you've only been on the airplane maybe a year or 2 or 3, you should be at least once a month, pick a page. You're en route, pick a page on your EFB and kind of peruse through anything that may have changed, or just knock the rust off and keep your tool, your mind, your tool well sharpened. In this industry, it's all about protecting your certificate and your medical so that you can have a long career doing what you love. And in order to do that, you got to keep your tool sharp. And you're right that there's a lot of that intimidation factor that corporate or private pilots might feel on a regular basis because maybe they haven't flown as often, or they're not doing the same, like you said, rote thing every day. And you had posed the question, have we seen an increase in ASAPs? Further down in this article that we were talking about, from the IATA, or the International Air Transport Association, a trade group for the world's airlines, reported a steep increase last spring in the rate of planes making unstabilized approaches, which typically occur when pilots try to land at too high of a speed or without enough thrust to have made the last-minute adjustments. The airline group reported that a rate of unstabilized approaches jumped from about 13 or 14 for every 1,000 flights before the pandemic to 35 per 1,000 flights in May. The problem of unstabilized approaches increased in airports around the world in the spring and summer of 2020. The group said, but the rate returned to pre-pandemic levels in the last few months. So they did see an increase. They did see a spike, but in the last few months, it looks like they're returning back to normal.
Well, I think that's, and let me ask you, because I think you'd brought this up. I don't know if it was in an episode or just talking amongst ourselves, but immediately after this all started and there was 0 passengers on the airplanes, are you used to, from an unstabilized approach standpoint, are you used to carrying more power? Because now you have a fraction of the weight that you normally had. And now if you kind of use those same numbers, I typically, about 51% N1's about where I'm going to be for my approach. That's just something that I have in the airplane that I fly right now. Mm-hmm. If I were to use that, except now I have 150 less passengers on the airplane. Yeah. Does that make a big difference in your approach, in your flare, in an unstabilized approach?
All of it. Your rotation. I mean, I can remember coming out of Los Angeles, when you're departing towards the west, there are 2 altitude restrictions on almost every single departure procedure because of a VFR corridor that exists off the shoreline out of Los Angeles.
And now are those at or below or at or above?
At or below 3,000 and at or below 5,000.
Oh, this should be good.
Yeah. So on an Airbus A320, 319, 321, it doesn't really matter. Even with a lightly loaded aircraft, those altitude crossing restrictions are never really a problem. I mean, maybe with a 777 or a 75 that's maybe not loaded, yeah, I could see how they'd have to really be cautious about those altitude restrictions. But on an Airbus, it's never really been an issue. And I can remember we had one passenger flying in a Neo to Cabo, LA to Cabo. This was months and months back. And we talked about this on the episode with my one passenger on board, and the captain was really cool. He made all PAs addressed to that passenger by name. It was like a
Mr. Smith,
170 plus seat corporate jet. So we took off, and it was the captain's leg. We decided the captain was going to fly, and we mentioned it in the briefing that we were very light. And, those altitude restrictions may be a problem. And he goes, yeah, you're right. We're going to be cognizant of that. And sure enough, as soon as we got to about 2,800 feet, I went, altitude. And he looked over and he went, oh, he was still hand flying. And he nosed the airplane over.
Holy crap.
And not aggressively, but it was like we were still about a mile away from that first point. So he noses the airplane over a little bit. And, we already had performed the thrust reduction altitude was already done. So we were in climb thrust. So it's not like we were in toga or anything. So we're in climb thrust. So he noses the airplane over. We crossed it at 3,500 feet. And I was like, okay, you're clear. So then he brought the nose back up. And here comes 5,000 feet, which was the second altitude restriction. And that one he crossed at about 4,800 feet. And he goes, oh my God, I didn't even notice. We talked about it. We briefed it. You even mentioned it. And he goes, I'm just in such this rote, as you mentioned.
That rote.
Yeah, you just, go through the motions. You're an airline pilot. You go through the motions. Every flight has to be the same. Same airport.
Same airplane.
Everything. And if I hadn't said anything, there's no doubt that he would have, been above that 3,000 foot restriction. Because that airplane was climbing rapidly with one passenger on board,
Because you're at that point, what, 30 to 40,000 pounds less?
At least, yeah. I mean,
321.
Our landing numbers, we had to do what they called a landing assessment because we had like a couple knot tailwind. And when I had to put in the weight of the aircraft, the proposed landing weight of the aircraft, it was off the chart. We were lighter than the lightest. We were lighter than the lightest number on the landing chart to see if, can we land with a 5 knot tailwind, whatever it was. And I was like, well, yeah, we can do it because we're lighter than the lowest. Yep. So, yeah.
Yeah. So when you're 50,000 pounds lighter, I'm sure that airplane probably wants to climb.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
Yeah. So you got to be careful. And I think that you're absolutely right, Roger. Thank you for saying that. Is a lot of those numbers I don't think were for rusty pilots. I think those numbers were because our loads were different. We were preoccupied with the airline industry. We were preoccupied with, who's been exposed, who's got COVID, who's, and
personal health.
Yeah. Family. All of this.
There was a lot going on at the beginning of this.
Yes. And that fear of the unknown really did creep its way onto the flight deck. And I think that's where a lot of those numbers that IATA had put out came from. Now, of course, I'm speculating because I'm no statistician. I don't have the data. I don't know. But as a person who's been doing this, yourself included, been doing this for 20 years, yeah, I can see how
things like that can happen pretty easily.
And now we're kind of returning, as we mentioned at the onset of the show, we're kind of returning back to higher numbers. I mean, we're still not there. We're only something like, I think the last number I saw was 73% of the loads from 2019, which is, hey, that's great. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it up. Just convince people to buy airline tickets like they bought toilet paper at the beginning of this thing, and we'll all be fine.
We'll all be fine.
We'll all be fine. You just buy those airline tickets because as soon as everyone has a vaccine, those destinations are going to be full and those ticket prices are going up. So you better buy them now.
Well, we can all hope and dream, right?
Yeah. Well, I am very privileged that I still have a job. that I get to show up to work, and in probably the next 4 hours, I'll be in an airplane flying a red eye to Philadelphia, where it's frickin' cold. And you know what? A Jimmy Crack Corn, I just don't care. I just feel privileged that I have the ability to do it. And I know, you feel the same, that we've talked about this job and how lucky we've been. And there's so many of those out there that have not been as lucky as us.
And our hearts and prayers go out to those people, and our thanks to the first responders. We kind of, talking about how lucky we both are. Tony, you just mentioned it. I feel the same way. And from the bottom of my heart to everybody that this has affected, whether they've lost their job, their income, family, friends, lives. We do realize that this is real, and all the best to everybody out there. We do hope that this turns around, not just for the airline industry, but for everybody out there, because it's been a year now, and it's changed the world. It's changed, our mental health and well-beings. And
yeah,
I just thought I'd throw that in there real quick. My sister's a nurse, and kind of, it's probably about a month ago, right around Christmas. I knew, but it was almost like I ignored it, or I didn't want to know the ignorance is bliss thing. But then, she sent me a text, how a couple days she drove home from work crying because of what she saw working at a hospital.
Yeah.
And it is real. I know this has nothing to do with aviation, but it is real. And all the best to everybody out there. And hopefully we are going to see the other side of this sometime soon.
Yeah. And it's so important to mention, and thank you for mentioning that, that there's so many pilots out there that have the privilege of flying with, feel that it's not as important, or it's not as crucial as the news media or politicians, or, the people in general of certain party or not feel that it is. It is. I mean, it's affecting all of us. And if I've heard the stories, I've met your sister, I'm so impressed with what she does. We have many friends here that are also in both nursing and in the hospitals, in the medical field. My neighbor's brother, his job is, he's a technician at one of our local hospitals. His job is to clean up the rooms after a COVID patient is leaving the room for whatever reason, before they can bring in another patient. Talk about the most dangerous, the most exposed job out there. He cleans hospital rooms for a living. He's been doing it since the beginning of the pandemic, and thank God he has not been affected by it. Who knows? Maybe he got it early on. We don't know. But I mean, we were talking just yesterday about all the people that are affected. My neighbors around here that have come down with it. Thankfully, I have not lost anyone directly, but we have friends that have lost parents and grandparents to this, and you don't know how it affects you until you get it. That's the bad thing about this thing.
It's the scary part.
And hopefully in the next 90 days, as more and more people get vaccinated, and we can start to see some relief. I know California's lifted a few of their lockdown restrictions. Now we can actually go to a restaurant and eat outdoors, which is a good thing. I know California's been in the limelight here in the last few months with the lockdowns and the number of cases. We have more cases than any other state right now, even with the lockdowns. So yeah, this is a serious thing. It's affected not just our industry, like what you said, Roger. It's affected all of us in one way, shape, or form. And we do appreciate all of those frontline workers and anyone that just has to go to work. They don't have the luxury to take an extra day off and stay home. They got to pay the bills.
Anybody and everybody.
Yeah. Recently I got an email from one of our loyal listeners, and oh my God, I was so excited. I love getting feedback. And he writes that, hey, guys, I've been listening to your show, your podcast lately, and it's great. Congrats. He further goes on to say he's a 737 NG and MAX captain. And I would like to clarify that the problem with the MAX was that the MCAS was receiving only information from one AOA sensor. That was for the entire fleet. What Legacy Airlines probably had installed was the AOA warning if the discrepancy happened between the two sensor readings. Again, congrats on the podcast and keep them coming. So, thank you so much for that feedback. I keeping it anonymous because I don't know if they want that information out there. But yes, Rob and I discussed in detail all about the MAX. And even though we had an option at Legacy Airlines that both AOA sensors fed information in MCAS, Rob did explain that although both of them fed information, if just one of those AOAs went bad, it could trigger that MCAS reaction. And so the software was the fix, as we mentioned in the earlier podcast. And, thank goodness that airplane is back flying. And it's exciting to hear how some of the carriers that have been flying those airplanes are now not only returning them to the skies, but now fulfilling those orders that Boeing so desperately needed to have filled because of the backlash from all the cancellations from the previous orders. So, helping out Boeing, I think, is crucial, not only to our industry, but to our economic growth, for our country, for countries around the world to have airplanes flying. And yeah, the MAX is a great airplane. And thank you so much for that feedback as well. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Squawk Ident podcast. If you find value in our podcast and you'd like to help us out, please visit our website at Av8rTony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, Romeo Tango Oscar November Yankee.com. There, you are encouraged to scroll down and check out ways you can contribute to our show by becoming a producer with a one-time or recurrent contribution. Every little bit helps. You can also leave us audio feedback with show topics that you'd like us to cover. You can also view some of the many photos that we've shared from the flight line. And under the guest book tab, you can view images from our featured guests. Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube users can find us under the Squawk Ident podcast. We encourage you to support us on YouTube with a like, subscribe, and a share. In closing, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, and take care of each other. Bye, y'all.
All the best to everybody.
See ya, and thank you for all of you do.